appraisal process, updating. How can you make your process more effective? Peter's from retail, so that will be different again in terms of how you can do it. And you're in a startup. Okay, so totally different organizations there. I could almost jump in and sort of think about the differences in terms of the style culturally. So one suggestion isn't necessarily going to be right for everybody on this call, which is what you'd expect. So let's start off though, get you chatting here. If you, where you're saying you want to either make your performance more effective or update it, what is it you think's wrong with it currently? Can you tell us in the chat? And if anyone is happy wants to speak while people are chatting, then that's also fine as well. If it's easier, if you want to unmute, someone just indicate and we can unmute you and you can just tell us. Come on, Anita, you tell us what's wrong with your process.
Oh, hang on.
I think, can she unmute herself?
Yeah. Am I on? Am I on?
Yeah. You are on.
Yeah.
Welcome, Colin.
I work for a legal services organisation, and we're a legal training provider, but we also have a membership base as well. And we are very resource tight, as I'm sure lots of organisations are. And we struggle. A lot of the managers see this as a tick box activity. I've tried, whether it be, the right training, the right coaching with managers to talk through this and to go through, why we do this, what's the benefit. We've tried different approaches. We've tried separating it down so it's monthly rather than a biannual annual and every 6 month approach. But they can't get their head around the value of it. And that's where we're struggling. I don't know if Lucinda is frozen.
Oh, I can hear you.
Oh, that's okay then. You've got a lovely face on the. Oh, there we go.
It's freezing. You go, I'm not sure that's my best.
It never does it when you're smiling, does it?
No, absolutely.
So yeah, I just, our system isn't awful. For me, it's the behaviours around the system and them understanding the value of it and them seeing it as an integral part of management, not as an add-on that actually is just a waste of their time.
Sorry, remind me, what kind of organisation is it that you are?
So we're a legal membership body and we also provide legal education as well.
So what sort of people does that mean? So you've got kind of, are there lots of individual contributors? What sort of jobs are they doing?
They could be managing a team who are learning and development advisors who are working with apprentices or distance learners. It could be all of the support functions, marketing, finance, all the usual HR. And then it could also be managing customer service teams as well. The team numbers could range from anything. They might have 1 or 2 in their team to 8, 9, 10 per manager.
So a complete variety. So some of the things you're trying to do already, and we will send these slides out, and actually I won't be able to cover everything in the webinar. I've talked about some of what I'm going to mention here in the podcast episodes that are coming out, and we've got a paper, a little reference paper that we'll send out to you next week, where it's just being finalized at the moment, which alludes to this. These are not magic points because you're doing lots of the right things already, which you'd expect, Anita, but making sure that people understand the purpose, the why, trying to help them buy into that is key. And what you're saying is that they're not buying into that. And I wonder why why do you think they don't buy, or what is the why? Are you saying it's about employee engagement? We should do this because it's nice. Have you got any people pains, I suppose, is what I'm trying to get at, that they may attach to? For example, high levels of attrition. Are there any people pains in your organisation?
I think one of the big things, and Peter, I just read your comment there, but one of the big things for us is we're not great as an organisation, if I'm being brutally honest, about sharing strategy.
Okay.
And vision, yes, absolutely. But we as an organisation don't necessarily see the breakdown of that. What does that look like? So I have managers all the time saying to me, Anita, how can I set goals and objectives for my team if I don't know? You're nodding there, Peter, you're the same, I think. if I don't know what I'm meant to be achieving, and I always say push back, push back, push back. But at the end of the day, if you're not getting that, that's not your people's fault. And you just do what you can do, because you know, if they're not, you know, if they're pushing back and they're not, if there's no movement. And I think that then disengages people, because they go, why should I bother? I don't get it from my boss. I don't see how I'm going to, you know, contribute to the bigger picture. And I think that's really disheartening.
So you've kind of answered a question there, haven't you, for yourself? And that why is so important in many, many ways. So the why is, why strategically is this important? So what is the business trying to achieve? And that's important in terms of smart objectives for everybody, because I want, the research shows, if we've got a research view on this, the research shows that people want to see purpose in their goals and objectives. And the purpose may be about how they're contributing to the overall business, or the purpose might be about where they're going in their career, or it could be about, but basically people need to see that what they're doing is meaningful. And if the organisation isn't communicating what's meaningful and what it's trying to achieve in some way, then basically you're taking that bit of buy-in away from people. And to be honest, you're taking away alignment, where people are going to be more, if you want to be a high performing organization, people need to know what the organization is trying to do. So your point really is maybe being a bit of a change agent and going and trying to influence the exec team, try and distill some of the things they're trying to achieve, and have some sort of top-down direction as well as that bottom-up, so people can connect it. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, it could be, we want to increase our membership by 10% over the next 3 years, or we need to reduce the churn of members by X, Y, Z. You know, there must be metrics that the organisation is trying to achieve. Those need to be communicated for people to see how they tie in. The other purpose is a consequence for people. The why, there's this what's in it for me thing that people need to buy into it. So I've talked one of it in lots of organizations. If you are in public sector, for example, where you can't align reward with performance management, then you need to make sure that there's something like development that's there for people. There needs to be something that there's some sort of positive consequence for people doing this. Otherwise, they feel like they're going through the motions. And the classic complaint, I've seen people say tick box, is where people say that it doesn't result in anything. In fact, my next slide here talks about these are the typical sort of complaints that you'd hear from people. It doesn't culminate, that second one, it doesn't culminate in anything. Either pay or reward in some way. And if you can't pay, could you progress or develop, or you know, other ways which people can see that there's a positive consequence. So they kind of go, and I've heard people loads of times sort of say, well, you know, I've been asking for the last 5 years to have a secondment or have a change in my role, and no one ever does anything about it. And of course, we often have that with lots of people we work with, are obviously going from paper to system, and the reason is because HR can't see it, because it's buried on page 5 of a document and they can't see it, whereas in a system you can pull that report out and therefore act on it more quickly. So that sort of why is really key for people. And the business needs to also think, one other point in terms of where people are not buying into it is that helping the line manager connect with the fact that what they're doing makes a difference to the performance and engagement of the people who work for them. So it makes a difference in terms of their motivation, the extent to which they're going to stay with the organisation. And, you know, let's say they have a pain in terms of having to recruit people, then manage people better. Then you won't have to do it. They don't join the dots up for some reason. They see it as something that's going through the motions as opposed to a strategically important activity. And again, that could be what the leadership do. So again, going back to your leaders, what behaviours are they modelling? Are they kind of saying, oh, we've just got to do it, it's an HR process, get through and do the appraisal? Or are they saying, you know, we've got a real problem with attrition. Actually, the way in which we interact continuously with our people and show we value them is going to make a difference to that. So it's connecting pains that managers identify with the sort of activity. So it's almost, we have to try harder to make sure that those connections are there, and it needs to be heard by people more than HR. It needs to be heard and seen to be a strategically important activity by the leadership. So kind of we need to work on them. Right, so let's have a look at other ones. So too long. doesn't work right. So Alice, people don't want to do more than one a year. Okay, well, perhaps come back to that one and see tick box. So I've got this 2 backward looking. So a lot of it, if it's seen as a tick box, managers go through the motions, and we all know how that feels. If someone doesn't want to be there, the way in which it's conducted, that makes a massive difference to how people feel about it. And I've got a slide here which talks about, this is actually, it was in the NHS, but they showed that a bad appraisal, i.e. where someone's going through a tick box. So this is the blue is a good quality appraisal. The red is a less quality appraisal as rated by the person, and green's no appraisal. And they linked it with engagement, employee engagement, which we know that employee engagement does link to attrition, productivity, and all those sorts of things as correlation. And they actually demonstrated that no appraisal was better than a poor appraisal in terms of engagement, right? Obviously a good appraisal is best overall, right? So that's what we're aiming for. And it connects with really important factors that are strategically important in terms of direction an organisation is going. So these are the sort of things that I think, I guess some of you will have come in as we've been talking. I can see extra people have come in, but I think you're all pretty much in HR or learning and development. What we really need to do is maybe start by convincing the leaders in our organisation that this is a strategically important activity. It isn't something that's a tick box, and making them buy into that. We have to convince them of these sort of things, because they need to model those right behaviours if you want to kind of change the culture around it. And then the culture change then will change the way in which the process is carried out by people, because generally the issue isn't the process per se, although I would argue when we talk about how things work, even though I say some of you people don't want to do it more often, it's often not the process that you've defined in your organisation that's necessarily problematic, unless, of course, you have got a ridiculously complicated form or something that you're expecting people to complete. It's more about how it's being delivered. So it's the style there. And again, the way in which it's delivered comes down to whether our managers think it's important. And we've always said that's going to be led to a certain extent by the what's in it for me, by the strategic importance, and by the importance that leaders place on it. Also about your manager's training. But a way that we also made it seem important when I was in-house, we actually set, delivering quality appraisals. We set managers an appraisals objective, which was about X number, about carrying out objectives within a certain time frame, and also a certain number of one-to-ones or check-ins. And we set it as an objective to make it seem important, because not just having your sales number or your KPIs as being important, but if you were a people manager in an organisation, we really defined what the responsibilities looked like, and part of those responsibilities are good performance management of your people. So there is something there where all too often people who are in line manager roles, they perhaps see the people management bit, it's a status, but do they see it as a key responsibility? And do they see it something that is valued as much as doing, delivering a project or something that's part of their role? So thinking about the role of the line managers, do they see people management as something which is valued by the organisation? Do they think it's important? If you have job descriptions, is it identified as something that's not a job description? If you have objectives, is it in there as an objective if you're trying to change behaviour? Do you recognise those who are doing a great job? If you have something like an engagement survey or a pulse survey, do you recognise the managers who are getting great feedback, who've got low attrition? Because the odds are they're probably doing a good job. And there's other things also, just thinking about people in, I've got a thing I call the people gene. Sometimes you end up with people in management roles that really don't care about people as much as possible. And I guess if they are more task oriented, trying to tell them that it's a key task that has to be done well for them, but try and get people who actually are bothered about people in people management roles. Sounds really simplistic, but creating career pathways. One of the things we did in the organisation I was in was we created career pathways for sort of specialist staff, so they could progress, and therefore they didn't. So if you're a project manager or a finance person, there was more than one way to progress up the organisation, and you didn't have to go up the organisation managing people. because we've all had the experience where the best accountant or the best salesperson is not the best sales manager. And management skills, they are different competencies. So again, thinking carefully about the people that are going into those roles and having other options for people to progress, which doesn't wedge them into people management when they're actually going to be terrible at it. So thinking about how, what other things might be influencing the style that people are bringing to this role in terms of that. So you picked up on some of the things there. Right. So then, is moving to a culture of regular check-ins the answer? Now, I said I'm going to ask you what you're doing currently. Let's get a sense of the people on here. What are you doing currently? Not that one, sorry. And please forgive me, my definitions that may not be spot on. Not that one, sorry. So let's just get a sense of people on this call. What are you doing currently? And you might have to go something else, because I've just been a very broad brush. Are you doing once yearly, twice yearly, hit and miss as in nothing's really working at all? Or are you actually doing continuous check-ins? And if you've got something else, pop it in the chat so we understand what something else is. Yeah, so actually, so most of you are doing once yearly or twice yearly. If you've gone to continuous check-ins, are you wanting to go to continuous check-ins, or have you mustered it? If there's anyone here who's mustered continuous check-ins, let us know. It'd be great to hear from you. So let me just put this here. So I'll keep an eye on the chat. So if you can give us any more context, particularly if you've gone continuous check-ins or something else, just to understand what's going on. As I say, we're trying to make this more workshop-y so that it's relevant to you. While I'm waiting for that to come up in the chat. So is moving to culture of continuous check-ins the answer? Well, to a certain extent it is, but I'm not sure that it's as simple as that. The reality is, if you look at the evidence, it's really, really clear, and we've got a research review about last 50, 60 years of evidence of what actually drives performance, which correlates in performance. And the consistent message that comes through is having clear goals coupled with regular feedback is what drives performance. And if you think about it, the purpose of the performance appraisal, it should be about performance and development, but it should be about making sure that people are aligned. So some of you have said already that one of the reasons it's very hard to align if people don't know what the vision is. So that therein starts a problem. And if there's, if it's not clear what the vision and goals are, but people need to have goals. The other thing is, when you think about this pure appraisal focus, that's why people complain it's backward looking, because you're kind of getting to the end of the year and it's more about, what have I done in the past, when actually what motivates people is talking about, what am I going to do, and getting feedback on when I've done it. So this concept of continuous check-ins and conversations is a good concept. It is likely to drive higher performance if it's done well. Because it's about really good quality feedback and good quality goal setting and coaching and all those kind of good things. The interesting thing is, loads of organizations, I mean, we're working with a university at the moment, and they're like, oh, but we just want to move to continuous conversations. So okay, so what does that look like? They're going, well, we just want to ditch this annual appraisal and go to continuous conversations. And you have to think, so do you really think if you just say, hey organization, we're going to move from this once a year appraisal that I know I have to whip the hell out of you in order to get you to even do that once a year, and just by me magically saying have continuous conversations, you're just going to go off and talk all the time about performance, aren't you? Because that's going to happen, right? We all live in the real world. So it's just one of those things that you said, yeah, nice idea, but it's just not, it's not a reality. So I'll share in a moment a style that we've worked with a number of organizations that's kind of got the balance of indicating what continuous conversations look like. Sorry, I forgot to share anything. So this is what you guys have said. You said once yearly, twice yearly, and a couple have gone to continuous check-ins. So it's a bit of a cop-out going to continuous conversations unless you define it to some way, because reality is, as I say, if you are currently running, as most of us are, a once-year process or a twice-year process, I'm quite sure that once or twice year process takes a fair amount of nagging to happen, or reminding, or otherwise, unless the world's changed dramatically since I was in-house, I suspect there's a bit of reminding that has to go on. So these sort of behaviours are not going to magically go like that. And as I say, someone on here was saying that that the managers don't want to do it. What was the one that you said? They don't want to do it more than once a year. And that's partially because they see it as not valuable, probably. And the other reason would be potentially because they think they're going to spend more and more time doing it. That's the other challenge, because they're going, hang on, this is going to take more time. So we have an additional challenge if we're trying to persuade people to do more. Right, so Peter, that's what you've got. So you're saying continuous feedback that nothing happens. Is that what happens? Is that?
Yeah, I think you know, it happens with the best will, but it happens when people can find time to it. And I think also it's a really good idea, but I think you have to be quite adept at giving the feedback and really knowing what to say and how to develop some meaningful goals for people, which is quite a challenge, I think, especially when you're short on time and things like that. So I think a lot of managers really struggle with goal setting, and then what I always say as well is, like, it's all very well doing the continuous feedback, but you have to let people know that they are having a conversation about their performance rather than it. Do you know what I mean? It's not just, oh, I just had a chat and that was that, because then people kind of feel like they aren't being sort of managed or aren't giving feedback. So you need to be really explicit about that, and you need to be kind of quite sort of clever about how you're aligning those goals and relating back to that. And that's quite hard as well, because a lot of our managers have like maybe 20 plus people and a workforce that fluctuates throughout the year. So keeping a track of all of that is really difficult for them, I think.
Yeah, because you're retail, aren't you? I can into big teams. So you really probably need to keep it simple. But as you say, it needs to have almost a level of formality. So you're checking or one-to-one, whether it's lightly documented or something like that, just to say. So I can imagine somewhere like that might work would be having an expectation that there will be a monthly, for whatever argument's sake, a monthly check-in or one-to-one, which is a very simple form, which has standard questions, you know, what went well, you know, how am I doing, whatever, just 2 or 3 standard questions that are asked, so that the person and give, but it's, you know, if you want to make it very positive in terms of feedback, you know, I noticed you did this really well. So having a very simple but standard approach that happens, that's maybe a 10 minutes or something, dead simple, because people are so busy and that side of things, that might be an effective way of doing it in your organization. But again, what we're saying here is you can't just leave it open. It does take skill, and in an environment like yours, you know, people need to get on and do it well, but it needs to be efficient as well. So defining it is really what I'm trying. You have to give structure. Change won't happen on its own. If you leave it vague, nothing will happen, nothing will fill void. But if you give it some sort of structure, as I say, a very simple check-in conversation template, maybe, that people have to document and upload, then great. The other thing I would suggest, don't know whether it would work in your culture. I haven't worked loads with retail, but it might work. You have big teams in NHS and things like that we work with quite a lot. If you can get it to be upwards, so if you had a system or whatever the form is, if the onus is on the individual to complete it, when you've got 20 people, that can make it, you know, easier, share the responsibility. Now it depends in retail, and if you've got seasonal stuff, that might not be realistic. Maybe the manager has to do it. But in some organizations with large teams, you can empower the individual to do the completion of the document, and that takes the pressure off the manager a bit.
Yeah, they don't really have personal email addresses, or they don't have work email addresses and access to computers and things like that a lot of the time. So I'm maybe looking at, you know, potential kind of app sort of options, you know, where you can kind of use technology on a phone or whatever and kind of send in feedback that way. But yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, maybe just a little simple template or something. But I think just give them a very simple structure that they go through and make that happen. I think that might be an approach that's realistic, and then you can monitor it happening. Please feel free if anyone else wants to put anything in the chat as to what's working, or anyone else got suggestions or experience in that kind of environment. So we want to make sure from an evidence point of view that it's goal setting and feedback, and that's the key, and you want to make sure that that's there around your process. In terms of when I did this survey, I did a LinkedIn survey on this a few months ago. And we do hear lots about check-ins, but the reality is that 80% of people are still doing some sort of appraisal process. So you're not alone. And that was reflected pretty much 70% were doing that here when we put that little poll up as well. So I think sometimes it's maybe died down a bit, but there was a point in time when there was a lot of spin, if you like, about appraisals were being ditched. They were talked about Adobe and Microsoft and Deloitte and all things were ditching appraisals, which actually, when you dug underneath the surface, actually wasn't true. They still had some sort of culmination, but they were trying to get these continuous conversations happening as well. And I think what we've pointed out here is if you just went just check-ins or just conversations, the question is, will it actually happen? Unless you have a way of tracking it in some way. Can you make sure the quality of the interactions there? How about goal setting? Make sure the goal setting's in there, because we know that's really important feedback. It can become very tactical, and then that's where you don't see the connection. It will become tick box again, which goes back to Anita's point at the start. What I tend to see is when you just go one-to-ones, people tend to talk about the here and now, my to-do list in a one-to-one, whereas you need to make sure there's this link also with our bigger purpose, our bigger strategically aligned objectives. If you have reward or talent or development process as well, if you haven't got anything that culminates, then that can be tricky too, because you haven't got that kind of conclusion in something that's just, you know, one-to-one after one-to-one after one-to-one. Now, in fairness, it might be right in your culture, Peter, that might be appropriate for yours, but I find in the majority of other businesses that you need something to culminate there.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that, and that's another like key challenge that we have, that kind of. So I mean, we pay our retail people from living wage, but there's not necessarily, you know, much to kind of go from there. And then also, you know, more senior roles, there's very low turnover there, so there's not. I really struggle with development paths and that, and what, you know, what is actually the outcome of, you know, of performance management and doing these regular one-to-ones, other than how are you doing, you getting on, well done last week, and where does their kind of development come from, and what can they actually take out of that process for them? It's all very well from our side of the view, but not necessarily for, you know, for the employees, I think.
Yeah, and so some of this will link back into the kind of culture piece, and honestly, I don't know the answer, Peter, but in lots of businesses, you do want people who just are happy to show up every day and do a good job. And in return, that you know, not everyone's going to climb the ladder, but I guess you need to give the opportunity for people, if they want to climb the ladder, to be developed and to be able to say that it's there. I wonder, I think if I suddenly got a job tomorrow in your organisation, I'd be interested to survey your managers as to what works there, because in terms of that and what they like. Because if you're saying the turnover's low, then they're staying for a reason. What is it that you're doing well there? You know, let's say, you know, maybe just in terms of understanding that there, because as I say, I'm not so familiar with retail as an environment, because I do find, because with the people that we tend to work with, they probably have more opportunity for discretionary effort compared to people who are on sort of, you know, living wage type thing. So it's an interesting subtle difference. But, you know, great if you haven't got turnover. Interesting to know what you're doing right from those people that feel positively.
Yeah, I think we've got a good culture. It's a family business, and store manager turnover is quite low. But really, I'm thinking kind of, you know, roles outside of the retail stores, turnover is extremely low. You know, people with decades of service, and I know from, you know, engagement surveys and things like that, a lot of the frustration and reason why people leave is they like working for us, but they don't want to work on the shop floor for the rest of their careers, and that's probably the biggest challenge that we have, because they want to stay. I just haven't got the jobs for them.
Right. Okay. So the thing there then is thinking creatively, I would suggest, about how you can give people that sense of variety, you know, sense of progression, or variety. You know, they might not want to be on the shop floor forever, but they've got to be to a certain extent. Could they be seconded? Could they mentor others, train others? Are there other things where you could create freshening up opportunities that they'd feel to be developmental and that they get access to. So what sort of things would help the business and people would see are fresh and exciting that they could earn, maybe. And don't underestimate how much people like helping others. The right people do. So getting the opportunity to be a mentor or a buddy is a status thing for many, and many people find it really rewarding. Being a health and safety expert or a mental aid first aider, or any of these type of things that just gives them a little bit of something different in their role, can work to kind of enrich it. So maybe those sort of things you could include it. Right, I'm going to jump back to performance here, and I'll keep moving just in terms of interest of people's time as well. So I've talked about the evidence. I say we've got, we'll send these out afterwards, or the links, in terms of we've got a research review that's where I've taken this from, which is about what drives performance, which is a lot of it. Clear objectives we've talked about. One of the other things that comes from the research is that if you have a performance rating, and in these organisations that link performance to pay, they showed that people are less honest if they think the feedback that they're giving or the rating they're giving is actually going to result in an impact to people in terms of could hurt them in the pocket or their career. Whereas if they think they're giving something from a 360 feedback, let's say, type thing, and it's about enhancing someone's career opportunities, they're more honest. So they showed that people, depending on what the purpose of ratings are, perceived purpose of ratings are, may differ in terms of how people will actually respond. And look, it's frozen on another really flattering image. Let me just really approach that. Managers are more honest when they're looking to give development feedback, and therefore I'll show you this model of, in my experience, it's quite useful to split out performance conversations about objectives from the developmental or career type conversations, which is something that you could think about in terms of your structure. So you're thinking, many of you want to change something. So if you are doing this, thinking we've covered quite a lot, and I have jumped around because we've made this more workshoppy. What I say is, first of all, think about what's the current situation in your organisation and why does it need to change from what you've got currently. So make sure you have that, understand what that real issue or pain point is strategically, so that when you're communicating whatever you're going to do differently, you can connect it with something strategic and perceived to be important. Think about what you've got in place currently. What is it you want to change about it? Is it just too backward looking? Is it just too long-winded? Is it just too detailed? I mean, one of the things I think is less is more. Generally, what we want is quality conversations. If you've got lots of ratings and lots of tick boxes, what that naturally does is gets people into a tick box mentality. I mean, I think we've got people in financial services that we work with, and they have to go through some of these annual assessment process, and it is literally a list of yes, no answers. That just gets you into a yes, no mindset. You can't really have a lovely, what do you want to do with your life kind of conversation when you're in a yes, no mindset. So for me, it's quite useful to maybe split that out. Or, could you simplify it? If you've got 10 values or competencies that everyone's expected to discuss it on, could you simplify it and say just pick the top couple? So that I'd rather have a quality conversation about a couple of behaviors or values than a really a banal conversation about 10 where everyone's lost the will to live. So meaningful. So think about, what is it I actually want to fix in terms of this problem? What might be the causes? Is it about the lack of sponsorship? Is it about the documentation? Is it about the buy-in? Is it about the lack of consequences? Think about that in the round as to what's causing your problems, or could be causing, and it may be multiple things, and what the possible solutions are. And part of that conclusion is thinking, what's the main purpose of your process? And I'll put another poll up here for you to be able to comment on this one. Now, the reason it's really important to think of what the main purpose of your process is that you would gear that around it. So if your process is about high performance, you are a sales organization and people have got to sell out and beat the competition, and there's reward aligned with it, etc., high performance, then it's going to be all about objectives, targets, and potentially ratings against that. And it might mean that you need to align reward in some way against that. So you need to make sure that there's a really fair way of doing it. If actually you've got, limited money to share around in terms of connection with bonus, if you've got you know, people and all working remotely, which many of us are, working hybrid. So you want people to feel connected, to feel loved. You want loyalty to the organization, and you want people to feel valued. So those two are slightly different. So one is you want to make people feel valued and well-being and that sort of thing. Or is it about, you know, you've actually got a problem with attrition? It could be multiple, right? But think what the purpose of your process is, because you don't want to design your process counter to what you're trying to, it could be counterproductive, right? So I had a conversation this morning with an organization that we're going, oh, well, we've got ratings on objectives and ratings here, ratings that. And I said, okay, so if someone, you know, achieves top rating on everything, what's the consequence? Oh, nothing, we don't link it to reward. Well, really, is there any people, what's the point? You know, for people, you can see why it's there. So you're almost better just to make it much more conversational, take out these kind of real specific nitty-gritty and make the conversation more about value or engagement. So what's more important? You want people to feel valued. Well, make sure the tone of your survey, the tone of your process reflects that. So saying, what did you do really well, and you know, how, you know, what are you really proud of this year? So make it less sterile and make it more about encouraging managers to have, so you build questions into the appraisal that are about people feeling valued. You know, what are you most proud of? What's your biggest achievement this year? So the managers are having that kind of conversation. You're steering and nudging them in that direction. If it is about performance and alignment of reward, then you need to make sure that the ratings are appropriately lined up. We've got, again, papers on things like that. If you don't do that, we've got paper on to rate or not to rate and how to do. We can talk about how you link. We do calibration, and the key with aligning to reward is it's got to be seen as applied consistently, and you need to make sure that people write really good SMART objectives at the start of the year if they're going to be rated about them. I'd also say it's quite important to have a mid-year appraisal if you're going to allocate reward at the end of the year, because you don't want people to get to the end of the year and then have a shock that they weren't on track. You really don't want any surprises. So you need to make sure that your process is efficient and transparent if you are going to allocate reward on it. And one thing with those, as soon as you have ratings, I've got a pet hate where you have terminology like average, if you're labeling people average, or you just think about the language that the ratings are. You know, if it's a 1 to 4 rating, it could be, you know, almost achieved, exceeded, positive language, as opposed to, you know, missed or below. It's amazing how it seems really obvious, but actually just think about the language if you are using ratings and make all the language seem positive. And I won't go into ratings in great detail because obviously just 1 or 2 people that affects, but I say I've got a paper on that which we can connect for people. Thank you, Casey. If you find the rate or not to rate link, she's got it there. So if any of these things you want to download, Casey's put them in the notes, the link there. So the ratings points that I'm talking about.
I'll also add them into the follow-up along with the recording and the slides.
Brilliant. Yes. Okay, Ruth. And the thing is, right, well, so are you manufacturing if it's shop floor? Is that terminology you're using, Ruth? So on the business owners, right. Yeah. They just want to know if it's a pay rise. Yes.
I don't know if it's about timing for us, because we do our sort of grading structure and grading reviews just before we hold the appraisals, and then we hold the appraisals in December, and then we announce what the pay rise is going to be in January. So I think there's an automatic link, and people see that their appraisal is linked to their grading review and therefore their pay rise. So I think that automatically, all they want to know, they don't care about the rest of the appraisal. All they want to know at the end of it is what my grade's going to be and what my pay rise is going to be.
So could you split it out? Just do it at a completely different time of the year?
Well, that's something we're considering. Yeah.
And I mean, that's total. That's human nature as well. To be honest, that makes total sense. The other things that really I saw this, I'm not sure if it's performance management or not, but I worked with a manufacturing Siemens Magnet Technologies for a long time. They had a really good approach to management and stuff like that. And you still had, you know, shop floor people, but they had things like ideas schemes where they actually had measured if you put forward an idea that or an innovation that improved the process. This is slightly outside of performance management. I just thought it worked really well because they had measured every aspect of their process, and I think they'd done lean and this, that, and the other. They were able to demonstrably measure how much value an idea, an innovation or saving was, and they gave 5 or 10% back of that in cash to the person who came up with the idea, and that had a really positive effect in terms. It wasn't just like a 50 quid. They were very well managed. They won top factory for quite a long time. But maybe thinking about, is there anything there where you can excite people to do something that would help improve? Because it's always about improvement, isn't it, in manufacturing, and how can you do better, faster, more efficiently, better quality, whatever it might be, and measure that, because people can get behind those sort of things. And the challenge is people tend to have all the same objectives otherwise, don't they? Because if you're working on a thing, so sometimes things like that could be worth looking at.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we've made this point earlier, actually, in terms of culture makes a big difference. So then I'm just in sort of conclusion, I'm going to share with you a process that works, a variation of this works for quite a lot of our organizations. Now, those of you where the managers go, I don't want to do lots of conversations. Well, there's lots of ways you go around this. One of this is it's your job, right? But that's a starting point. But some of it is that if the appraisal itself is going through the motions, and actually maybe people don't do 3-hour epics anymore, but they feel really long when you've got to go through a lot of questions, is what we were saying is actually break it down into sections and give each section a different focus. Now, this one's got 4 check-ins. I'm working with 3 universities at the moment that have 3 check-ins because they have 3 terms. So it's whatever naturally might fit for your organisation in terms of frequency. And if you have once a year, maybe you're lucky to get twice a year. Okay, so you've got to be realistic. But the logic here of this is breaking out what's typically in one appraisal form into 4 different conversations. So they're 4 different shorter conversations. And if you think back about this point, we were saying it's quite good to split out performance, because I might be having a conversation saying, look, you are not meeting these performance objectives. It's quite hard to then go on to, oh, what do you want to do with your life conversation in the same conversation? It's incongruent. So this is actually splitting them out so they all get the sort of decent amount of time. So we say that, wherever let's say your financial year is January to December for simplicity, then end of year appraisal and setting our objectives. And obviously you can use whatever terms, priorities, PDR, whatever languages. So that's the logic. Close down last year, but look forward to next year. We would always say you should be having regular conversations, one-to-ones, establish what good looks like in your organization. So, it might be weekly in some, it might be monthly. Monthly might be unrealistic or unachievable in others, in which case the minimum I'd say people should be talking is quarterly or once a semester if it's a thing. So, but ideally I'd be saying you should be having monthly one-to-ones in many organizations. So then at the end of quarter 1, we're talking about development, mid-year appraisals here, and career aspirations. So just simply, the end of this quarter 1, month 3, what we're saying is we set our objectives in January. It's now March, April. Let's have a check-in. How are you doing on your objectives? Do you have any development needs that if we met them now would help you achieve your objectives? Because if you think about it, I used to be in training and learning and development. I used to think this is really illogical. I get all the development needs that are coming out, at the end of the year, 12 months later, and by the time my IT were able to suck it out of this Excel, I'm thinking, right, so this development need is 18 months out of date, really, if you do it at the end of the year. So logically, it makes a lot of sense to talk on, because our development should be related to achieving our objectives or achieving our job role, then we should talk about it earlier, right? But especially, and if you've got a system, shameless plug, a system like Actus, then you can pull those out real time and respond to those development needs, which means that we're more likely to help people perform. So it kind of gives it a focus. You're doing development to help people achieve, as opposed to, well, here, have some development, or compliance, of course, which is the other one you've got to do. So that's, you could have a conversation there. It might be 15-20-minute conversation. So we're not saying sit down for hours, but you're doing well on your objectives, or how we're doing on our objectives. Any development you need is a little bit of a coaching conversation, and you've got to focus, because sometimes managers don't know what they need to talk about, but that makes sense. Okay, ask how they're doing on their objectives, and do they have any development. Month 6, so this is really important, as I said, if you are doing ratings, but it could be a check-in on performance. If you want to talk about behaviours or values, maybe this is when you focus on that rather than at the end of year when you're summing everything up, because you've got more time to have a conversation. So let's talk about how you're how you're doing your job. Let me give you some feedback on, you know, how well you are demonstrating the values. It could be that kind of focus. It's, you know, it's up to you. So depending on what the purpose of your objective is, so you could give this a bit more of a behavioural focus if you wanted to here. And then month 9, I think it's quite good because you at the end, towards the end of the year, you can think, do you know what, this person's, yeah, cooking on gas, they're doing really, really well. We do not want to lose them. So this way you're thinking, right, well, where do you want to go? You know, show them that you're interested in their career and moving them forwards, that sort of thing. So it's a conversation there. But again, it doesn't have to be a long conversation. It's a one-to-one, just with a bit of a focus on that person in terms of their career aspirations or succession. So you're touching probably on objectives each time, but thinking about where they want to go. And then at the end of the year, it's a end of year appraisal, but it's basically summing it all up. And because you'd have talked about the objectives more than once, hopefully the development's pretty much in track. You know, have you completed your development? You've got a shorter end of year appraisal. You've got less content to put in there, because what you've basically done is taken that, you know, 2-hour appraisal that you do once a year and split it out into conversations at different times. So that's just a model that I've seen it works really well as a logical focus, and managers can get their head around it. You can also target people to do things by certain deadlines, so which is better than just leaving people to be continuous, because as we said at the start, that won't happen. It just doesn't happen. So key points that I'm suggesting here, and I'm coming towards the end, so if anyone wants to put any questions or chat, please drop them in the chat. Make sure development links to achievement of objectives, skills or competencies. Talk about ongoing discussions. You want to make sure that managers are using a sort of approach which is empowering staff, holding them accountable. It does make sense, if possible, if you're talking about development versus performance, if you want honesty, they should be maybe separately dealt with separately. If you are talking about performance related pay, you want to maybe look at calibration. I haven't got into it in too much time, but making sure that that's done there. But basically, the point about this continuous performance management approach is it's just more it's more tangible in terms of this. It's breaking something down and getting people to do it more frequently, but hopefully therefore you have more quality conversations, because they're not, you know, losing the will to live. And if we connected it with all these other aspects in your organization, then that's quite helpful too. Okay, so just these slides are coming out to you. Other things that are coming up, we've got doing a coffee club next week, which is even more interactive than this. It's very much free. There's not content. We kind of discuss other people's content, talking about organizational development. We're doing 360. You want to see our 360 product or know more about how to do 360? We've got that coming, and you can read those for yourselves. So those are the topics that are imminent. And then other resources are all here, and the links are in a PDF that will come out to you. So what I'll do, just for ease, if you want us to follow up with you on anything, I'm just going to put this up so you can just put it on there, and I'm just going to come and consult the chat and check if there's anything that you any kind of chats or comments, if anyone wants to. I hope that the maybe you're all stunned in stunned silence or reflection. I guess what would be really interesting is there anything that you're going to try and do differently as a result of investing your time here? Is there anything perhaps put in the chat that you think, do you know what, I'm going to try that? You know, we've thrown lots of ideas out. What might you do? And if you came because you wanted to do that, has that, you know, have you got some inspiration? I'm just reading here. So Alice saying, consider not linking reviews to bonus. Yeah, actually surprising, lots of reviews don't link to bonus. I'd say it's less common than it used to be in lots of organizations. I can't remember, Alice, what kind of business you work in. Yeah, as in not think about whether it's valuable or not. Financial services. So yours probably done. You've probably got quite a well embedded link then potentially between reviews and bonus. In that sort of situation, you can have your performance objectives linked to bonus, but say you could have behaviours stripped out and have conversations about that. You could use something like 360 feedback. You may already do that, where you're getting insight into how people are doing things, or you might want to make sure you have a rating which isn't just what people do, it's how people do it, because sometimes you find that really pure financial service, stereotypical approach is quite hard, and just about performance, which can introduce risk. So of course you want to make sure that it's done effectively. Brilliant, Ruth. So it's a good opportunity to think about the questions that you can add in. Definitely, if you want to reflect on more of this, listen out for the next 3 HR Uprising podcast episodes, because they kind of build on each other into how you can do that. It comes out on a Monday and it'll start next Monday. So it's on this type of topic. Brilliant. Okay, right. Well, thank you so much for joining, guys. If anyone wants us to, feel free to stay on and chat to me, but thank you for staying with it. I know it's slightly longer than usual because it was more workshopy, so I hope that you've got some food for thought there. And yeah, if anyone wants to chat with me, I'll stay on if anyone wants to ask any one-to-one questions or otherwise. Thanks. Cheers, guys. Bye. I can stop recording.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you for contributing.